Hello, everyone. Good evening. Today we have a very special speaker with us. He's originally from Brighton, UK, and he's taught English as a foreign language to adults and teenagers in Brazil, in South Korea, Belgium, and Costa Rica. He's currently the president and a co-founder of BELTA, the Belgian English Language Teachers Association. He's also a very active member of the online ELT community, and you can also find him moderating ELT Chat, which is a weekly discussion on Twitter with teachers from around the world, producing the TOEFL Commute podcast, which I highly recommend, and mentoring teachers for ITDI, blogging, and also presenting at conferences online and offline. So today with us we have James Taylor. Hi, James.
Hi Bruno, thank you very much for the intro. It's lovely to be here.
Wonderful. So whenever you're ready.
Okay, great.
Just before you start, sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah,
I'm just going to tell everyone here on Hangout that you could you please mute your microphone so James is the only one speaking. Okay, thank you. So James, over to you.
Thank you. Okay, so it's really nice to be here. This is definitely the latest presentation I've ever done. I'm normally in bed now, but it's worth it for you guys, don't worry. And it's really nice to be doing this webinar for Brout. As Bruno said, I'm an ELT chat moderator, and I guess we think of Brout as one of our offspring. So it's quite nice to be here to be part of this with you. Okay, so the idea of this talk is basically, I don't know about you, but I feel like we have access to so much stuff now, so much information about our teaching practice, and it's fantastic, right? We have access to all of these. We have webinars like this one. We have online conferences where we have blogs, and we can get journals and books, and there's just so much stuff coming our way if we're inclined. I mean, I know I'm a bit of a freak when it comes to teachers because I'm kind of obsessed with this stuff, and it's what I do all the time. I know most teachers are not as obsessed as I am, but if you're the kind of person who's watching this webinar on a Thursday night at 10:15, or you've decided to watch it on YouTube later, you're probably not that different from me. I feel like we have access to so much stuff. I mean, just in the last month, I've been teaching for 10 years, almost 9 or 10 years. But just in the last month, I received my first ever copy of the Braz Tessol newsletter. I've just become a member, so it's my first ever copy. It's a fine read. I've been reading this, so there's lots to learn in there. I've also just completed a course with ITDI with Philip Kerr, which is about translation and own language activities, and it was just a really fantastic course. Gave me lots to think about, just with things like trying to get the students to use flashcards more, and how translation and the students' own language can be used, which I've never really done very much of. Here's his book, which I'm plugging here, even though I don't benefit from it. I'm almost finished reading it, and it's excellent. Everyone should own one. I'm planning to do the Delta next year. That's my plan, anyway. Hopefully it'll work out. And now I have to, which means I have to now learn this, which I don't know. Maybe some people who teach English think, well, how can you teach English and not know this? Whereas maybe another group of people would think, oh yeah, I don't know, I've never used it either. Well, if you want to do the Delta, you got to learn phonetics. And I also watched a webinar the other day that Hugh Deller did, where he talked about colligation, and I was like, I have no idea what colligation is. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's basically very similar to collocation, which most of us would know as the relationship between words and other words. Whereas colligation is the relationship that words have with grammar items. And you know, how certain items of vocabulary tend to have relationships with certain types of grammar. I'd never heard this word before watching the webinar, and I thought, wow, that sounds like really important. That kind of thing I should know. You know, I've done my training, I've done a fair bit of training, I've read all these blogs and everything. So anyway, the bottom line is there's a lot of stuff coming our way, and sometimes it's kind of hard to you know, get a handle on everything and sort the good, you know, as we say in English, sort the wheat from the chaff, you know, to sort of what is good and what's not so important. So in this webinar, this is my whistle-stop tour of some of the things that I think we should be talking about more, and some of the things we should be talking about less. It's going to be a real fast ride. I'm not going to go into any depth on any of these things. That's for you to do later if you want to. But it's just me kind of just saying lots of stuff. I'm going to be doing far too much talking. I would really like to know what you think, and obviously I can't see the comments that you can make, but I would hope that you can have a good chat at the same time, and I'll be very surprised if anyone agrees with everything I say. So feel free to, you know, be honest in the chat box, and then if you have any questions, then hopefully the one of our lovely moderators could collect them for the end. So let's get started, shall we? Okay, let's start with the first one. Let's start with the big one. Okay. So grammar, yeah. So I don't know. It depends on the kind of teacher you are. I know. I think someone got their microphone on there in the Hangout. Yeah, that's better. Thank you. Yeah, so grammar. What do I mean by grammar? Well, obviously, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be teaching grammar or talking about grammar. Obviously, we do, and we need to, and it's important. I was listening to an interview yesterday with a teacher, and she was talking about her teaching, and she sounded like a good teacher, and she was interesting and everything. But she basically, like, couldn't. It seemed like she almost couldn't speak about her teaching without talking about grammar. It was like her whole class was grammar. That's what it sounded like. I'm sure it's not, but it was interesting to me. Like, this was like the only, you know, I want them to practice this grammar, and then we do this. You know, I was like, okay, fine, but there's more to teaching a language than teaching grammar, and I think it can be a bit of an obsession with some teachers with teaching grammar. One of the first things when I've, you know, as Bruno said, introducing me, I've taught in 4 different countries, and without fail, in every country, the students will want to ask me certain questions at the beginning of a course when they meet me for the first time. It doesn't matter what level they are; they all want to ask the same questions. So, basic stuff, right? You know, where are you from? Why do you live here? People seem to find it strange, but and one of the most common questions is how long have you lived in my country? You know, so how long have you lived in Brazil? If you now, if I have an elementary class, they want to ask that question, but if they're an elementary level, then you know, they don't have the grammar yet to form this sentence. They don't have the grammar to say, you know, how long have you? They don't know the present perfect. So, in that situation, think about what would you do if you were me? You're an English man abroad, and you've been asked this question: how long have you lived in this country? I mean, they could ask you this question in a different form, maybe, if you're a Brazilian teacher, as I assume nearly all of you are. They could ask you, how long have you worked in this school? You know, well, that's what they want to say. Or how long have you lived in this city? So you're in that situation. They want to ask this question, but they don't have the grammar. So you've got basically the choice. You can say, okay, you're not ready yet, I'm afraid, to ask that question, because that's not further on. Till further on in the course. In fact, I have my copy of New English File Pre-Intermediate, and I think this is the first time you can see this kind of structure here is on unit 7B of the pre-intermediate. So if they're in a a lower level group, then you say, sorry, I'm afraid you can only ask me that question in 3 to 6 months, depending on how much time this course takes. Or do you just teach that item not as a piece of grammar, but just as a unit of language, as a piece of vocabulary? This is an expression we use. You don't teach them this is the present perfect, but you just say, how long have you lived in Brazil? There you go. How long have you lived in Sao Paulo? I don't think, there are ways of teaching grammar without explicitly teaching grammar. That's my point. So I think, yes, grammar is important, obviously, but it's not everything. Okay, enough about grammar. Let's move on. First, underrated. Okay, pronunciation. Whoever wrote this thing that I got off the internet somewhere has never spoken to a British person. That's what I'm saying, because their idea of how the British people speak is ridiculously bad. But I put it there for your amusement, so you can compare it to my accent as I speak. So let's be honest. You've got your unit in the book, okay? This is what you've got to do. You're teaching New English File here, Unit 7C. And you want to try and cover this in a class. Let's say you've got an hour and a half, okay? So you start here, and you're working your way through the reading, and there's some grammar there. And then you get over here, and there's a listening, and maybe the students have more trouble with this listening than you thought, and it takes an extra 15 minutes, let's say. And you think, no, I'm really going to struggle to get through this now. Okay, what are you probably going to skip? That bit. Pronunciation. And this might be back to front for you there, I'm afraid, but pronunciation. And I think a lot of teachers do this. You might disagree with me, say in the chat if you do, but I think it's like the first casualty of time for timekeeping is pronunciation. I'm not saying the teachers don't teach it. I just don't think we do it enough. I used to have a different opinion, and if you search back through my blog, you'll see that a few years ago I wrote a thing basically saying pronunciation is not such a big deal. I've changed my mind. It's a good thing about blogging. You can go back and realize that you were wrong in the past and realize that you've learned things. So I think that I've come to realize in the last year, I've had sort of a bit of a personal evolution on this, especially in the last year, where I've realized that no, I should be doing more work with my students with pronunciation, and I think we generally neglect it as teachers. I've been very inspired by the work of a blog called ELF Pron. That's ELF Pron, Pron for pronunciation, and ELF is English as a lingua franca. So that's a blog written by my friends Laura Patsko and Katie Simpson, in which they give lots of really fantastic examples of how you can use a whole variety of different multinational voices as a way of teaching pronunciation. So there's fantastic activities on that blog, and I highly recommend it. Okay, speaking of different voices, I don't think nowadays really that it's acceptable anymore that our students still hear predominantly American or British accents depending on their materials. It's just not acceptable anymore. It can't continue like that. I can understand if you're using books that were written 5-10 years ago, maybe, but not anymore. It has to change. I think that the idea that our students need to be exposed to a range of different accents, and I don't just mean native English speakers of native speakers of English. I don't mean we should also have more Australians and Canadians. We should, but really, what I think was most useful for our students is to hear a range of accents from around the world, people who are using English as a foreign language, just as they will be, because that's the reason why our students are learning English. They're not predominantly learning English to speak to people like me. they're learning English so that they have a tool that they can use anywhere they go. I had a student in Costa Rica last year who was just the perfect demonstration of this. He was a Costa Rican businessman learning English to go and do business in China. That's the reason. So it's a Costa Rican man, needs to speak to Chinese people. He needs to learn English. That's a very clear example of the kind of student, the kind of reason why people are learning English. I also used to teach at DHL. DHL is a German company. They had Spanish-speaking employees, so the language of DHL, the whole company around the world, is English. That's the reality. So as teachers, there's so many opportunities for us to bring in different voices, different accents from around the world. I also think it makes our lessons more interesting. Okay, next one. I told you this would be quick. Oh, okay, this is another heavy one. Overrated, ed tech. Now, there'll be people who will be upset with this one. I don't know if any of them are here or watching, but it's just something that always seems to get people really, what's the word I'm looking for? Get very excited, I guess. Okay, first thing I should say, I like using technology with my students. I love using technology in my life. I'm using it right now to speak to you wherever you are around Brazil or around the world. That's pretty amazing. I love it. I use Google Docs. I've been using Google Docs for years with my students. I form WhatsApp groups, all that kind of stuff. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with using technology in the classroom. There isn't. But it just seems to me that there's something about ed tech that really makes people very evangelical. I don't know why people get quite so excited about it. I mean, I think it's cool. I think it's good stuff. But there are there's a lot more to teaching than just like cool apps and things. Now, the best people who talk about technology, people like Russell Stannard, when they talk about technology, they talk about it in a way where you can see there's pedagogy and there's a reason for it. But especially in blogs, there's a lot of I feel quite shallow talk about technology. And I wonder if when the whiteboard was invented, were people writing articles about 16 ways you can revolutionize your teaching with board markers. I don't know. I'm being facetious, but there are tools. They're very useful tools, but revolution doesn't happen with the tools. It happens with how they're used and with the people who are using them, which is us, the teachers. And that's a much more interesting conversation for me than a lot of what I see and read related to EdTech. Okay, next one. Overrated, the teacher. Okay, wait, before you get outraged. Wait, hear me out. So, if we think about this as a political issue or a social issue, then teachers are clearly and definitely underrated. Okay, they're definitely underrated within society, most societies anyway. They should be paid more, and that's obvious. Okay, so I'm not talking about that before you get upset with me. I'm just thinking more about how sometimes teachers perceive what they do and perceive their role in the classroom. So I think it's a really important part of our evolution as teachers is to get to the stage where we barely think about ourselves in the lesson. And that's like the kind of, I think, part of the end game, really, you can try and reach as a teacher. You become a much better teacher when you're really not thinking about what you're doing, but you're thinking about what your students are doing, and your role is to make those things happen, with your students. So it's just really about how you approach your teaching. The moment you can kind of let go of worrying about yourself and worrying much more about the students and what they're doing and what they need from you to achieve, you can become a much better teacher. Okay, right, next one. Underrated. Teachers' books. I don't know if it's just me, but I don't. If you've seen, teachers' books seem to be a bit sort of treated as like the kind of unwanted member of the family that you kind of get given with your other books, and they're like, oh, I have my student book, that's good. Workbook, okay. Teacher's book, sort of thrown away. I don't know if you've ever been given, like, you've got a new group and your school gives you the books, and then you've got like this really sort of beaten up copy of the student's book, and it's been drawn in and written in, and it's got coffee stains on it, and then the teacher's book looks almost kind of brand new. I think that's happened to me many times. I think that kind of tells you the way most teachers sort of treat their teachers' books. It's like only opened occasionally. And by the way, I've never understood why teachers write the answers in the books, in the students' books. Why do they do that? The answers are there in the teacher's book. Just how much effort is it? Anyway, so, but I think that tells you everything you need to know about how they think. Yeah, I just think that I've found myself in a situation where I've been looking at the course book, looking at what the students are going to do, and then deciding, oh yeah, I need to do something extra, going and finding an activity, putting it all together, and then just glancing in the teacher's book for some other reason and seeing like a perfectly good activity right there that I could have done, and it would have saved me lots of time. I just think that they're actually pretty good, these books. They're a pretty good resource. They're not a set of instructions. You can do what you want with them, but I definitely think they're worth more than sort of being tossed back in the locker as you go off to your class with your half destroyed copy of your student's book. Okay. Overrated, speed and ease. This is not so much about teaching, but about something that happens in our industry that I find bizarre and unfortunate about it. So when I'm talking about speed and ease, I'm not talking about the speed at which I'm talking here, a million miles an hour, trying to get through everything. I'm thinking more about how English courses are presented. I always see these kind of things as a bit of a red flag. When you have things being marketed as easy and as fast. 3 easy ways to improve your English. I think you guys will know this, because as far as I know, nearly all of you are people who speak English as a foreign language, and as a result, and not only do you speak English as a foreign language, you speak it well enough to be able to teach it. So you guys are like the success story. You're the students I always want to have, right? And so you know what it takes to learn a language. Now, unless you're some kind of genius, which maybe you are, you know that your learning of English was something that didn't happen overnight, and it took a lot of hard work and time in order to get to the level where you are now, which is where our students would love to be. It probably wasn't easy, and it probably wasn't fast, because why is that necessarily a good thing? It's just marketing. So I don't know, whenever I see these kind of things, and you see schools around, with signs up saying, learn English in 3 months or something, and no, sorry people, if it was that easy, then everyone would be speaking foreign languages, and my Portuguese would be much better than it is. Okay, next one is writing. I think is very underrated. When I talk about writing, I mean any type of writing. So let's start with the long form writing. So long form would depend on the level. At lower levels that might be a paragraph. At high levels they might be writing a couple of pages even. I think that writing is just a fantastic way of getting your students to consolidate what they've been trying to learn. For most of our students, unless they're doing exam preparation, they don't really need specific writing. Maybe in a business context, but they, like writing an essay or a movie review or something like this, it doesn't have any practical application. So what I try and do with my students is make it as personal as I possibly can. I just basically just want them to write. I really don't care what they write. It could be anything. And when I give writing homework for my students, I basically say you can write about this, or anything else if you really want to. because I just want them to write something. Um, it's an opportunity for them to practice the things that they've been learning without the pressure of having to be right first time, which is what happens with speaking. So they've got more freedom, they can take their time. If they don't have a lot of free time, they can do the best they can. If they have more, they can spend more. And it's good for some of the more studious or introverted learners that we have. So I just think it's such a rewarding and useful activity. And then going to the opposite end of the spectrum, I find it amazing that there are lessons, and they do exist, I've seen them, where the students don't have notebooks. So our students should be writing all the time, because if they don't have notebooks, how are they going to remember anything? That's what notebooks are, right? Notebooks are memories. Every single student should be making copious notes during a lesson. And I always say to my students, you should have like 2 notebooks, one for class where you just write random, anything, and then one at home where you can sit there and write it out properly and make it look nice, and record vocabulary properly and things like this. But yeah, they it's just, I just don't know how students can learn a language without a notebook. I mean, if it's a digital version, fine. I mean, but I think most people prefer to write it out by hand still. But the point is, they should be writing. And we've got the long form, we've got the very short form, the notes, and anything in between. Anything they can be writing. Just doing a quick pre-writing task before making some notes as a pre-speaking task, just to make some notes before they do the speaking, to get some ideas going and think of some phrases they'd like to use. Anything like this is really helpful and underrated, I think. Okay, moving on. Overrated reading skills. This is something I've been interested in recently, and I've been hearing more and more about it. Okay, so in this picture, these bizarre pictures, so on the left is someone throwing a stone across the water, which is otherwise known as skimming, and on the right you have a brain scan. So this is skimming and scanning. That's what that represents, those strange images. You could also include guessing the meaning from context of vocabulary here as well. So from what I've been reading and hearing recently, there's not really any research that tells us that these are useful skills that we should be doing in the classroom. In fact, what the research tells us is that it's not really a foreign language ability. It's an ability which comes from our first language into our foreign language. So if we can skim and scan in our own language, then we can do it in another language. If the students are successful at it, the reason they're successful at it is because they have enough vocabulary to understand enough of the text to know what's going on. And if they're not very good at it, it's because they don't have enough vocabulary to understand the text. So I think it's something that I'm really going to sort of remove from my teaching, not because I think it's very harmful, but because I just think there's better things to do with the time. And I think that the answer to that is vocabulary. I think reading texts are amazing, listening also, but particularly reading, are amazing resources that our students can use. And I always say to my students, take that text home, mine it, go through it, find the pieces of language that you don't think that you couldn't use right now, and say, okay, I know what this means, but I couldn't use this. I wouldn't use that expression, that phrase, that sentence structure. Take it, analyze it, break it down, try it a few different ways yourself, and try and incorporate it into your own language. I think that kind of approach to reading is more useful than practicing skimming and scanning in particular. Yeah, which it may be a little difficult because we have this real set routine of when we have a reading task. We have some questions to get them interested, and then maybe some discussion points, and then we do the skimming, and then we do the scanning. Then there's a meaning from context. It's a real kind of routine that we seem to have, but the fact is that it seems it's not really based on anything other than it's just a thing that we've always done, and it doesn't seem to be particularly useful. Okay, what's next? Oh, okay, underrated. I don't know how well you can see this, but basically it's 2 pages of a course book with a big arrow pointing at this, which is, excuse me, which is the final activity on the page. Okay, so what is this? Well, let's go through what you see on the page here. So it's you can see that we go through the activities here. It's a unit based on countable and uncountable nouns and quantifiers. That's the practice. So the students go through, they do some vocabulary to check the, then they do the grammar and the listening, more grammar activities, quite a lot on this page. And then right at the end, this bit, it says, get ready, get it right. And what they have to do is go to this page and do the free practice. So that's what the arrow is pointing at. It's pointing at the free practice activity at the end. And this is a thing I think that teachers do, just like the pronunciation one earlier. You're going through the lesson. Okay, countable and uncountable nouns, that's pretty tricky, especially with quantifiers as well. Students struggling a bit, you have to spend more time. And what happens is you get right to near the end of the lesson and you've just got 5 minutes left to do this practice activity. The problem with that is that the whole point of this unit, the whole point of going through all of this stuff, all of it is to get to that ending, and that's the point, to do that bit. None of this is really as much use unless they do that bit at the end. And I think it's like a bad habit of teachers, which is to say, oh, I've only got 5 minutes left at the end, so we'll just do it quickly. The problem is that if you do it quickly, they're probably not going to learn it. So that when you go on to the next class, because you've got to move on, so in the next class you've got to do 7C, your students might be struggling to use quantifiers and countable and uncountable nouns. So I think that bit at the end that's the whole point of the lesson, and that's the bit where, as teachers, we should be going, okay, that's the bit that's untouchable. Everything else has to work towards that point. Going back to the teachers' books, I often think in the back of the teachers' books you get photocopyable activities. Those are often the best activities the students can do in the whole course book series, because they're the ones that give them like really good opportunities to practice. I don't know, if I was a course book writer, I might have a revolutionary approach and put those activities in the students' books, or at least in the main part of the unit, that they have to do them, because that seems to me the whole point of what we're doing. Okay, let's move on. Fun. Okay, I teach adults, sometimes teenagers at the moment, so I don't teach kids. If you teach kids, you might be very suspicious of this. That's not my area, so I'm not talking about that. You may find what I'm about to say ridiculous if you teach children, I suspect. I'm suspicious whenever I hear people talking about fun. Maybe it's just because I'm grumpy, but I'm not grumpy. I just think that as teachers, we have a primary objective, and our primary objective in these 3 words, our primary objective is the first word, not the third word. And I just worry sometimes when I hear teachers talking about fun, that that we have to entertain our students. Our students have to be really entertained by what we're doing. I don't necessarily think that's what they pay us for. That doesn't mean I think our classes should be boring, of course. And if they can be fun and they can learn, great, no problem. But they don't have to only be fun. They can also be interesting, motivating, challenging, educational, in the sense that they learn something new, not just about language, but about something else in life. They should get something from our materials, I think, beyond just improving their grammar or their vocabulary. But when I hear teachers talking about like everything's got to be fun, I go, okay, maybe. I get a bit. I begin to sound a bit grumpy, so that's why I think fun is overrated. Okay, next, my underrated. I told you this was a really fast tour. There's a lot to take in. I hope it's all going in. So this is my next underrated resource books. I love resource books. I don't have much to say about them. I'm sure we all know about them, but that's my collection of resource books there, or some of them. Uh, I just think they're the best thing that we have in ELT. The best, like the best in terms of published materials. They're just fantastic, and I just don't really ever hear anyone talking about them. So I just thought I'd give them a mention because they're just the best. I'm just going to give a special mention here for Penny Ear's grammar practice activities, which is every teacher needs to own this. It's just the best. And of course, Teaching Unplugged by Scott Thornberry and Luke Meddings, which many of you will know, and is an absolute lifesaver due to the nature of dogma teaching. It's generally very low prep and brilliant activities. So that's all I wanted to say. Hooray for resource books. Okay, overrated native speakers. Another bit more controversial, this one, but as I am a native speaker, I can say whatever I like. The comments you can see here, which are taken from Facebook, are taken from the page of a British television show which is called Match of the Day. It's the highlights program on a Saturday night on the BBC, which shows the best moments of the Premier League on that day. I couldn't imagine life without it. And this is from their Facebook page. So these are all comments written by, I assume, native speaker British people. And I'm pretty sure that no one watching this would use any of these comments as examples for their students because they're not very well written at all. Now, it's important to say I'm not being a snob about these people. These are people speaking, it's their language, and they're using it as they need to communicate with each other, and it works. I mean, no one's reading this and saying, I have no idea what you're talking about. People are communicating and understand each other. That's fine. So I'm not being a snob. I'm not saying these people should be embarrassed or anything, not at all. They're not my concern. But of course, we're language teachers, so this is a different context. I think this idea that native speakers are a good model is very flawed. It's flawed for a lot of reasons. If anyone follows any of my work online, you'll know I've been quite involved in the TEFL Equity Advocates campaign, which is about recognising the need for equality with non-native speaker teachers. And the reason I've got involved in that is just because it's just such a simple and obvious form of prejudice to me that I don't find acceptable, and it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, even if you leave aside the more sort of social political aspect of it, the fact is that you, as a non-native speaker, someone who's learned English, are a fantastic role model to your students for how they can learn English. They can aspire to be like you. They can't aspire to be like me because I never learned English in the sense that they are. They're not going to be as good at English as I am, and they're not going to sound like me, because why would they need to try and sound like me? That doesn't make any sense. It's just not a realistic or even worthwhile objective. I mean, I just don't see any point to that. So you're much better positioned in this respect to help your students. And the idea that native speakers are somehow a good model of English is I mean, ridiculous. If you just spend some time with my family, I mean, my family are not they don't speak badly, but they just speak normally, and it's probably, unless you've spent time in the UK or in the US, it's probably not a form of English that you're so accustomed to. I'm using my best English with you tonight, of course. Okay, so speaking of which, speaking of my family there, overrated authenticity. Okay, if you did those texts you just saw were all examples of authentic texts written by native speakers, and you wouldn't use them with your students. Authenticity, I think, this idea that an authentic text is automatically better for our students is a very flawed idea. I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with having a text which is specifically designed to help our learners learn something in, a particular language point. I can't think, especially obviously at lower levels, I can't see why there would be any issue with that. And yet I think, there's some, you often read and hear people sort of say, oh, well, it's an authentic text, like that automatically makes it somehow better. I don't necessarily think that's the case. When you've got higher level students, then it's good for them to be exposed to that kind of thing. It's good, but certainly up to, I would say, B1, even maybe B2 level, there's no reason at all why these sort of pre-prepared texts are necessarily a bad thing. I think they're probably a good thing, actually. That said, underrated authenticity. Oh, okay. What does that mean? Well, I mean authenticity in a different sense. I mean that when you have our students, they need kind of real language, vocabulary in order to succeed in English. They need real pieces of language, or else they'll end up looking like this guy here on the slide, where they have nothing to say. And I think this is a flaw of teaching, especially in the past, where when I used to do a lot of rote learning and this kind of thing, where language, the students weren't given an opportunity to learn like real authentic chunks of language that they can employ in very specific situations. They need these kind of pieces of language that they can put together in order to communicate, and they need the real thing. Now, the real thing, by the real thing, I don't mean what my family say when they're sitting around the table. I think the real thing that fluent speakers of English, not native speakers, fluent speakers of English, use when they're communicating together. Functional language, I think, is absolutely crucial if we want to move our students beyond just the lowest levels. And I also think it plays a really important role if you want to get your students past the intermediate plateau, when they sort of stop learning. It feels like they stop learning. These big pieces of functional language are extremely useful. Okay, next one. Silence. Shh. So what do I mean by silence? Okay. Well, it's often when you have in your teacher training that you hear the trainers talk about student talk time and teacher talk time, that STT, TTT thing. And I have some issues with this way of presenting the discourse in a lesson. One of the problems I have with it is the fact that it doesn't differentiate between the different types of discourse that's happening. So not all STT is the same. So there's a big difference between a student talking time where it's one student asking the teacher a question in front of the whole group, compared to, say, a pair of students sitting together having a conversation, compared to a group of students having a group discussion, compared to another group of students having a group discussion, but one of the students is completely dominating the conversation. And I could go on. There's like tons of examples you can think of different ways that the students can be speaking in a lesson. And I think that that just saying you have student talk time or teacher talk time is way too simplistic. But the main problem I have with it is the fact that those are not the only two things that should be happening in a lesson if you teach anyone who is not knee high. Then there should be some silence as well. I think that if you have a lesson where there's always someone talking the whole lesson, there may well probably be some issues with pacing, and there will probably be some issues with the fact that the students are not really being given a chance to reflect on their learning, or being given a chance to consolidate what they're learning, or even just to practice a little bit on their own before you're asking them to produce something. So I think that silence is something that should happen in all of our classes at some point to some degree. I mean, there may be classes where you don't have very much. There may be classes where there's quite a lot. It just depends. There's not a fixed amount. but there should be some. And I think that as teachers, we tend to be quite extroverted. I'm not, but most of you are, I think. And we feel a bit insecure if if it isn't busy. It goes back to that fun thing again. If the classes aren't busy all the time, something about English language teaching, we like busy classes, students running around, stuff stuck on walls and everything, and those things are fine. But I think there's a time and a place for silence, and the time and the place for that silence is now, because I'm going to stop talking because I've been talking far too much. So that's my last one. There you go. Here's my rampant self-promotion with my podcast that Bruno was kind enough to mention earlier, ELT Chat. I'd love to see you there on Twitter, joining the parent of Brout, and there's all my details there on the right. So thank you very much, everyone. I hope you were able to take all that in. I need to lie down now. But before I do, I'm happy to stick around and answer any questions or discuss anything with anyone. Bruno?
Yes, James, thank you very much. It was very informative and very cool. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. And I'd like to open for questions if you're willing to do it, right?
Yeah, stay here all night.
Does anyone have questions? Or maybe you want to share your idea of what is overrated and underrated in ELT?
Yeah, I'd love to hear that too. That would be really interesting. I came up with this list a couple of months ago, and then since then I've probably thought of another like 10 things I could have added to this. So luckily for you, I didn't. Would have been here till midnight.
Maybe learning styles.
Oh well, that's a controversial one. Don't think it didn't cross my mind, but I would definitely agree with that. And on the flip side of that, I would say underrated research and evidence.
Yeah, that's true. Natalia here, we were watching you on YouTube, and the book titles were a bit blurred and mirrored.
Okay.
So if you could show the books again
Certainly.
and tell us the title.
Okay, let me just grab them. Right, so I showed you 4, apart from my copy of New English File, I don't think you need to see that. I showed you, okay, so the first one, this is Philip Kerr's book, which is called, I'll hold it as still as I can, Translation and Own Language Activities. Is it back to front for you?
It is,
yeah,
but no problem. Okay, translation and own language activities. Okay.
And that's by Philip Kerr, published by Cambridge. It came out this year. It's new, and I think it's one of these books that's probably going to be very influential in over a long period of time, because it's really, the activities in this are really things that have really gone out of fashion, using their students' own language, but there's absolutely no reason for that at all, and he's very, very good. Okay, I showed you Teaching Unplugged, a classic, of course, by Scott Thornbury and Luke Meddings, published by Delta. Every Home Needs One. Okay, got that one?
Yes, please. Yes, thank you.
Got
that. This one was Grammar Practice Activities by Penny also published by Cambridge. Another classic.
Okay.
And then the last one was an English phonetics book, which I haven't read yet, so I can't say if it's any good or not. But,
it's the phonetics.
Yeah, it's the phonetics book. So it's
for language teachers.
Essential Phonetics for English Language Teachers.
What's the publishing house, sorry?
TP Publications.
Thank you.
It's a very short one, which is good because I'm scared of this. And it's by Tony Penston. That's the author.
Tony Penston, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Giselle has a question for you. Giselle, you can turn on your microphone, or if you prefer, type it in and then we'll ask. But by all means, you're welcome to turn your mic on.
Hi, Giselle.
Giselle needs a second. The mic icon, I don't know if that's a problem. It's on the top, in the middle. Wagner, you can turn on your microphone if you want to suggest the books. And then Ila has a question too. Ila, could you ask your question then? You can turn on your mic, of course. Or if you prefer, just...
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I've just heard some webinars about how overrated certificates are, like CELTA or any other certificate. I'd like to hear a little bit about you, James, from you, James, about that. What do you think?
Yeah, I've seen people talking about that as well. Well, I think I'm one of those people who just had like the best time of their life doing their CELTA. So I loved doing my CELTA. I just had a fantastic time. So, and I really learned a lot. I mean, I think one of the main criticisms of the CELTA is that the idea that you can become a teacher with only 4 weeks practice, 4 weeks training. And I have some sympathy with that. But then the thing I would say is, okay, but what's the alternative? Like most people who teach in places like I do, I'm not talking about state system, but in private language schools around the world, maybe not most, but a lot of people do not have that level of qualification. They don't have CELTA. So my argument is always, if you don't think CELTA is enough, then basically this is the industry. That's most of the industry, private language schools. And then there's that little bit at the top where people are qualified. And if you don't think CELTA is enough, then it's just totally unrealistic. So that's my main issue. I'm planning on doing my Delta next year, as I said. So, and I'd like to become a CELTA trainer. So I think they're. I think they are what they are. You have to know what it is. You're not going to learn everything, but you can learn a lot from them. So.
Thank you, James.
You're welcome.
Wagner would like to recommend a few books. He mentioned the Collins series, which has different accents, and he's now mentioning Work on Your Accent. Maybe that's what it's called.
Yeah, I don't know that book, but one thing I always try and talk about with my students is, the difference between teaching pronunciation and teaching accent. If you have a student who's, sort of saying, or it happens occasionally because the British accent thing. Oh, I love the British accent and things. And I'm like, yeah, okay, but you shouldn't speak with a British accent. I mean, if they want to, that's up to them. I'm not going to stop them. But I think really good pronunciation. My priority with my students teaching pronunciation is intelligibility. I want my students to be able to go anywhere in the world and speak English, and people will understand them. That's my goal, not to make them have a particular accent. In fact, my honest truth is I want them to keep their own accent, because I think your accent is part of your identity. So, but it's up to them.
It's not working.
Okay, James.
Hey,
I have a question for you. Something that I'm curious about. You are a foreigner. You live in Brazil.
I do.
What's your idea of the teaching of English at public schools in Brazil? Do you think it's overrated or underrated?
Public schools, I really don't know. It's not my area, and I wouldn't want to speculate because.
But your personal feeling, that's why I asked you. What do you think it is?
All I know is what other people have told me, and I think generally people can be very unreliable. So I don't entirely trust people's versions, because people tend to sort of tell you what they experienced, and you never know how representative that is of reality. I think, like a lot of things in Brazil, there's a huge variety of things available to you, right? You know, like pretty much everything that's possible in Brazil, you know, pretty much everything that's possible you can do in Brazil, from one extreme to the other. And
Giselle is saying now that her opinion, public schools in England aren't better either. Like they're not very good.
sorry, I didn't catch that. Can you say again?
Giselle is saying that in England, public schools are not that good either. You know.
Yeah, I guess it really depends. Really depends on how you look at it. I mean, it's a long time since I went to school. So generally, because we have a very strong kind of state system there, where most people go to state schools. You know, even if they have, you know, even if they've got money, people still do that. So they tend to be okay, but you know, like so I don't have any even young relatives who are at school at the moment to know what it's like. But I think you said there's like no Spanish or French. Well, I did French at school, but it was very badly taught though. At least either it was very badly taught or I was a very bad student, or both, because I can't speak French, and I used to live in Belgium, and I couldn't speak French when I lived there, and so, but they should. I would be very surprised if there isn't a foreign language for teenagers in schools. They must do. Although with this government, who knows? Don't get me started.
Karen's is asking how often you publish new podcasts.
Well, we do our podcast by season, so we've just finished season 2, and then we do an episode every 2 weeks on a Sunday. We release it, so because it's called TEFL Commute, so it's ready for your Monday morning travel to work. And so we travel to, so it's ready on Monday mornings, and we publish every 2 weeks. But we'll have a break now. We've just published one on gifts, and then we'll have a break probably till February, and we'll come back. It's a lot of fun. I hope you listen to it, because I really enjoy making it.
It's great. And Wagner recommended work on your accent, and now he's telling us that it teaches students to improve communication with a series of exercises.
Oh, who's that? Someone speaking.
Okay,
Yes.
can you hear me?
No. Yes, is it Wagner? This happens sometimes.
We're good now.
Okay, now can you all hear me?
Oh, there you go. Hi, Wagner.
Is it? Okay, well, the book I was telling you, well, congratulations first. I really liked the talk. And the book was created by 2 speech pathologists from England, and they help actors to change their accent. For example, to American English, the American accent. But the main point of the book is to help students to know how to produce sounds in English. So how can they produce the t sound, the k? And they are really simple, really easy to understand. I really liked it. I thought it was much easier to understand than Adrian Underhill's book, The Sound Foundations. I thought it was a little bit complicated to use the phonemic chart at the same time. And the other one, you mentioned the accents, which are difficult to find in books. There is a series of books also from Collins called Listening, and they have a range of accents from all over the world. Chinese accent, Polish, German, and it's really useful. I've been using with my students, and they really like it. And I guess that's pretty much it.
Okay, thanks, Wagner. Yeah, I know that they've started. Some publishers have started to do this more. I know that the Global series as well, written by Lindsay Clanford, which I think is Millen.
Oh yeah, that's right.
I think they have some different accents as well. But I just think it should be just standard practice in ELT nowadays. It should just be standard. This just should be a normal thing. I do think,
yeah, absolutely.
and I do think as well that one of the best things that the students can hear are examples of people from their own language background who are very good speakers of English. So for Brazilian students to hear examples of really good Brazilians who are really good at English is an excellent role model for them, and very useful. You know, more useful than listening to me, I think.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a little bit difficult for teachers. For example, I created a course at a school I used to work for, but teachers don't really focus on teaching pronunciation. They think it's too difficult, especially because of the phonemic chart. But in fact, you don't really need to use it.
No.
There are other ways. I have a friend who teaches in the US, and she never uses it. And she's a speech pathologist. And now I'm getting this idea, but it's also helpful sometimes.
Yeah, I think this. I'm not. I know too many good people who I respect too much, who love it, to dismiss it. You know, like these people are really good and they know what they're talking about. So I can't just say, no, they don't know what they're talking about. I think that there is. I think that there probably is a very good place for it, but it's not something I've really needed. I felt like I needed so far, but I will. I think I might try it out next year. So I saw Gisele was asking about my retirement plans on teachers' money. I don't know. Like you say, I don't think I'll ever retire. But no, I'll. I don't know how old you think I am, but it's a little way off yet.
Thank you very much for a brilliant talk, James.
My pleasure.
And don't you, people, don't forget to participate in the raffle. We're raffling Igor Cavalcante's book, English para o Professor. And I hope you liked it like I did, because I really loved it.
I was wondering. I know that book is to help people improve their English, but I was wondering maybe I should get it to help improve my Portuguese.
Yeah, it could work both ways. My husband is doing that. Thank you, everybody, and good night.
Thanks for coming, everyone, and thanks for asking me about people.
It's our honor.
Bye, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.